بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا وقدوتنا محمد عليه أفضل الصلاة وأزكى التسليم اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. If you haven't been made aware, there's we're calling an audible on the schedule, so we're trying to finish a little early, so I'm going to start a little early, and everything's recorded so people can catch up. We successfully fielded and responded to 74 questions yesterday. If you asked a question yesterday, you can go see the answer. I responded to every single one of them. The best one, clearly, was the following comment: a cup of coffee a day leads to 12% lower mortality. And 4 or greater cups a day is associated with 18% lower mortality. The largest benefit is around 3 cups a day. That's what I do. Cardiovascular mortality is around 19% lower. My response was, Allahu Akbar. Yeah, we can clap to that. So, I've got my dalil, you've got your dalil. Lakum dinukum waliya din. All right. Our book, for those joining late, Al-Dharī'a ila al-Makārim al-Sharīa, The Art of Cultivating Noble Character. Many people ask where to get the book. It's not on Amazon, walillahi alhamd. You can get it from Mecca Books and a couple other publishers. We do still have Google. You can find it. It's not hard to find. The entire point of the book is about making human beings fit for their ultimate purpose, their highest purpose, which is to be the khulafa of Allah, the stewards, the representatives of Allah on earth. To do that, you need to purify yourself. You need to tame and discipline yourself. Human beings are made up of 3 faculties: the faculty of the intellect, which is the ability to discern right and wrong. Allahu Akbar. All right, hold on. Ladies, you don't get to see what's coming here, but you're going to like this. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. This is a prophetic sunnah. It's like the black stone being placed in. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant all of you righteous spouses and righteous children. Ameen. Everybody say Ameen. Just look at what a little bit of instruction can do. That's not my problem. Listen, al-Mufti mahbus bil-Mustafti, right? They said that the Mufti is imprisoned by the Mustafti. He just has to, I only deal with what's in front of me. Yes, so the faculty of the intellect, which is the most important one because it enables you to discipline the other 2, it is purified and disciplined until it becomes wisdom. That is a chief, supreme virtue of the intellect. There are others, of course, who went through them. Desire, the oldest and strongest force and faculty that human beings have, is disciplined until it becomes temperance. That is the chief primary faculty, primary virtue rather there. There are other virtues that we covered as well. And the anger faculty is disciplined until it becomes courage. That is the supreme faculty, the supreme virtue with the anger faculty. But there's a 4th cardinal virtue, and that is justice. And that's what we're talking about today. It is not tied to one particular faculty. Rather, it is the balancing and discipline of all of the faculties put together. And in the Arabic language, al-adl, al-qist, the different words that are used for justice, they all have to do with equality, balance, and harmony. Justice embraces all of the cardinal virtues that we just said: wisdom, temperance, and courage. You can look at justice from various perspectives. You can look at it from a potential or active perspective. Potential meaning that human beings have an innate love for justice. Even, the author says that even gangs have rules among the gangs. Organized crime, those types of things, they have their own codes that they live by. Everybody who has a sound heart is grieved by injustice and wrongdoing. He even says that our inclination towards harmony, whether it's musical harmony or aesthetic harmony through art, comes back to our innate love for justice. Again, in that linguistic sense that it is balance and harmony. The active type is what you usually think of, which is how you deal with others. You can also look at justice from the perspective of divine versus human. Divine justice is the complete orderliness of Allah's creation and actions. Anything in the creation that would be a little bit less or more, it would be unjust out of the mizan, out of the ability. Could someone do me a favor and turn off or redirect the fan? It's a little cold. Barakallahu feekum. Human justice, of course, that's what we're after, because that's our area of responsibility. There's 5 areas in which people should practice justice. One of them is between a person and their own creator. That is done by living in the knowledge of his oneness and according to his laws. The second is between the faculties of his own soul. That's what we've been talking about this week, balancing and disciplining yourself. The next one is between one and their forefathers or their ancestors. I thought that was an interesting one to include. So that you follow their good examples and their good advice, but you also pray for them. The next one the author mentions is in your conduct towards others. That's very, very, I think, comes to mind first. Honoring their rights and being fair to them in commerce and trade and otherwise. And the last has to do with rulers and people that are in leadership, which is dispensing justice through sound judgment. Real justice, true justice, is both inner and outer, okay? You could have someone who does the right thing that leads to a just effect or a just outcome or a just result, but if it's not inspired by inner justice, then it's not the virtue of justice. And I found this was interesting because I've also made a similar argument about goodness. Many people come with questions about, oh, well, I know so-and-so and they're such a good person, but they're not a Muslim or they do this thing. And one of the potential responses to this is that people can do things that are objectively good or that have good results or good outcomes on other people, but capital G good in the definition of what reality is the good that purifies your soul and gets you into Jannah, and that cannot be done without the intention to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the intentions are secret. The intentions are only known to Allah. Is it ever preferable to forego justice? Very common question. Many people who approached me with questions during this week had situations where they themselves were wronged, or someone they knew was wronged, or they wronged somebody else. Is it ever better to forego justice? The author distinguishes between committing injustice yourself or committing injustice in general versus your own personal enduring of injustice. And he has a really interesting, I think, expectation that he sets that statistically speaking, everybody is going to endure injustice. Like, you're going to be wronged at some point in your life, and it's important to not be thrown into crisis by that, to expect it, and to be train yourself as to what you might do in that type of situation. So in the first situation of the two, if we're talking about committing injustice, the author is very clear, committing injustice is always wrong. Always wrong. It's never okay to choose injustice. He calls it blameworthy in all circumstances. And he even says that the person who deviates from justice on purpose deserves Allah's curse, according to the level of deviation, unless Allah chooses to forgive them. You're not allowed to practice benevolence and charity with other people's rights. The same thing with forgiveness that we talked about the other day. However, when it comes to your own suluk, your own journey, wayfaring, and enduring justice that might be done to you, again, there are different situations. First, we'll look at what might happen, and then we'll look at what you might do about it, when it's okay, or perhaps even better, to endure justice patiently, versus when it's actually not okay at all to let it slide. Types can include, like in wealth, someone takes your money or your inheritance unjustly. It could be your honor or your dignity, someone who undermines your reputation, or it could be your physical body. It could be pain and suffering. When is it praiseworthy or when is it blameworthy to forego justice? It is blameworthy to forego justice if it is humiliation. Okay, it involves humiliation of yourself. This is something that we covered in a question that was asked previously. Or if it emboldens evil. Okay, we have to realize that it's not just about us. If letting something slide is going to empower or embolden an evildoer to perpetuate that evil on other people, it is not the more noble thing to let it slide. That justice must be done in order to curb that harm and to prevent it from reaching other people. Similarly, the last situation the author mentions if you are foregoing justice out of cowardice. That's not virtuous. That you're just afraid. And we talked about that, talking about the faculty of anger, and that is a deficiency that's a deficiency in courage, so it's actually a lack of virtue. When is it praiseworthy, not obligatory, but praiseworthy to forego justice if you are enduring wrong? In certain appropriate, he says, foregoing one's own rights in an appropriate manner and time. It's considered a type of forgiveness if it's related to your wealth or your reputation or things of that nature. The Prophet ﷺ embodied this, of course. He would not retaliate if his own honor was impinged upon. However, if the honor of the deen was impinged upon, then he would react firmly. The author mentions a saying to illustrate what he's getting at. He says, "It is said, treat people with benevolence rather than justice, since benevolence brings people together, whereas justice is likely to separate them." And how many times have I gotten questions from spouses talking about getting their rights? You can go the way of justice, but be prepared to have the way of justice exacted on you as well. And if everybody were to exact every single right that's due to them from everyone, you'd be in a very tough spot, and you wouldn't probably like it if other people treated you that way as well. That there is built into the creation a certain amount of benevolence, and he'll also talk about grace in a little bit, when it's okay and when it's good and when it's virtuous to bear patiently with the poor behavior of others. It's part of life. It's part of human life. Let's see here. Deceit. Deceit is usually bad. Not always, though. It indicates a behavior in which a person's outer action is inconsistent with the inner intention. Usually this happens because someone intends harm or they're being selfish, and that is blameworthy. That's not okay. The only situation in which deceit is praiseworthy is when someone is doing it for the benefit of the person who's being deceived. And that means, like, if you're trying to get your children to eat their vegetables, or if you're trying to, sometimes for pedagogical purposes, sometimes teachers will do this to their students, or they'll play dumb, right? For example, they'll act like they don't know something. That's deceit, technically speaking, but it's for pedagogical purposes, and it's okay. But obviously, most situations of deceit are not. Love and its relationship to justice and its relationship to faith. Love is the inclination towards what is thought to be good. There are two types. There's natural attraction, and then there's human-specific love, which falls into three further categories. Amorous desire, right? Romantic love, that's one type. We've talked about that enough already. Two is utility. That has to do with group affiliation, right? Your nation, your ethnicity, your tribe, your, whatever, that type of thing. That's a type of love. And then the third, and the most superior to all of them, is the love of virtue, right? So you can think about how you might love a sheikh or a teacher or the righteous. You don't love them in an amorous way. You love them because of their virtue. Friendship is a specific type of love, says the author, and it is rare. And I'll talk more about friendship in a bit, true friendship, not just like you have some things in common. He says, it's already rare that two people are true friends. It's extremely rare that three people will be true friends. And beyond that, it's pretty much unheard of. That true friendship is almost always between two people. What about passionate love, ishq? Al-Rāghib al-Iṣfahānī says it is excessive love, and it is not justified when it is done through pleasure. It is justified if it's done through virtue. So don't deceive the nafs and think that your romantic inclination to someone is necessary. Dress it up in ishq and write poetry and say that this is just, you just being pious. It's not that simple, right? It actually has to do with a love of virtue. And yes, virtue can be instantiated in people, and to love that, you could perhaps have some excessive love towards that. If betting were halal, I would probably bet that's not what's going on. You're probably just enamored with somebody. Most of the classical poetry dealing with ishq is talking about Allah anyway. Hate to break it to you. Virtue of love. Love is one of the driving forces, gets back into love and justice, in the systematic regulation of human affairs, after which comes justice. Love comes first, says the author. If people love each other and deal with each other with love, there is no need for justice. Think about marriage. It is said, Justice is the stand-in for love, and justice is only to be applied when love is absent. What about faith? Love is superior to fear when it comes to faith, since fear causes hatred and dread and is usually an extrinsic motivation as opposed to an intrinsic motivation. Parents, he says, obedience out of fear stops working as soon as the cause of the fear ends. He said this 1,000 years ago. The sacred law, as much as we talk about the punishments, actually the sacred law overall encourages love much more than it encourages fear. He talks about the congregational prayer. He talks about holidays. He talks about visiting the graves and visiting people's homes and the pilgrimage. All of these things engender love between people. It's only very seldom that the sacred law instills fear to stop people from getting wronged. Back to friendship, al-Rāghib has a larger section on friendship where he talks about how important friendship is. Sometimes, now in online culture, I know the guys, they're fed this stuff about like stoicism. You don't need anybody. Just you on a mountain, your thoughts. al-Iṣfahānī is very much against that. He says that one is always in need of friends, in times of difficulty for assistance, in times of ease to share the joy. The person, he says, the author says, the person who thinks he doesn't need a friend is conceited. Just as the person who thinks that it's easy to find a friend is foolish. True friends, he says, are like kindred spirits, just like the hadith about the souls recognizing each other. That's the real friend. Of course, the company that you keep is extremely important. We know this, very, very common hadith and things that are mentioned. It helps transform the evil that is in you, and spoiler alert, every single one of us has evil inside of us. It helps turn that evil into good. On the other hand, if you have evil company, it will corrupt you and pervert you. We know the hadith about good companions being like the perfume seller, bad companions being like the blacksmith. The Prophet ﷺ also said that a person is on the religion of his friend. In English, we say, birds of a feather flock together. People are influenced not just by the character of others, but also by their appearance. How many of the kids are wearing soccer jerseys this retreat? How many Lamine Yamals and Mbappes? Right? How many kids start wearing, the hairstyle of Lamine and such? Right? This is imitation. That's how it happens. It's not inherently evil. We're just trying to demonstrate that there is influence. This is how, who you watch, who you follow, it all has influence on you. I remember being a young man, and I only mention this because someone asked it in the Q&A, where there's a point where like all the kids in my middle school bleached their hair to be like Eminem. Surround yourself with the people that you want to be like. It is said, and I really like this part because you've probably heard that the word for insan is related to nisyan, which is to forget. He has another derivation, and it's possible that they're both true. This one is much more convincing to me, that ins comes from uns, which has to do with congeniality. And so it speaks to the quality of human beings that are naturally drawn to the things that they see, both good and bad. We are social creatures. Strengthening social relations is a duty and an obligation. We must strive to speak kindly. That involves the rational faculty. We must be forbearing. That is disciplining the faculty of anger. And we must try to be temperate and generous, which is the discipline of the faculty of desire. Grace. It's important, the author says, to be tolerant of some bad behavior, because it's going to happen. And doing so encourages others to refrain from bad behavior themselves. What's the limit? He says, as long as it's not perverting you and your character or overwhelming you. That you have to realize that when you are sustaining the bad behavior of others with patience, you are teaching them a better way. Solitude. Meeting people is necessary to bring people into contact with one another. The one who asks Allah for complete independence is actually, in reality, asking for death, says the author. People are naturally dependent on one another as long as they live together in community. And it's abominable, he says, to avoid the company of people who can benefit you, especially if that benefit has to do with virtue or knowledge. Some say that seclusion is undesirable except in 3 situations. He says a ruler retreating from people to manage his kingdom, a sage retreating from people to discover wisdom, and the pious retreating from people to worship Allah. The author says that any other reason is blameworthy and has no virtue. See, we have a natural affinity with al-Rāghib because he kind of has these hot takes. Isolation, he says, robs man of his humanity. And my reflection on that is perhaps that's why solitary confinement is a torture technique. Human beings need sociality. The person who assumes solitude is good does so because he is already dead inside. That's the author's words. Ouch. The sage, in particular, should mingle with common people in the outer practices of the sacred law and participate in all acts of worship so that his virtues have a positive effect on other people. The Prophet ﷺ said, it's better to mix with the people and be patient with their harm than to retreat and be by yourself. Also, another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ was approached by a group of people who complained that they ate and ate and ate, but they were never full. And the Prophet ﷺ asked them, do you eat together or do you eat alone? They said, we eat alone, in which the Prophet ﷺ instructed them to eat together because there is blessing in it. Enmity is the opposite of friendship. The enemy waits to harm you, just like a friend waits to benefit you. The author talks about different types of enemies. There are hidden enemies, there are open enemies. Hidden enemies usually involve shaitan and that lower nafs, which is a shorthand for the faculty of anger and the faculty of desire if they are not disciplined. As for open enemies, we're usually talking about human beings. Sometimes it could be someone who's just generally ornery towards all people, but usually it's someone who's got a particular chip on their shoulder, such as the author says, ignorant people that have enmity towards people who are more intelligent than them, or people who are in competition for worldly benefits, such as leadership, fame, and wealth. Or it could be enmity because of kinship or neighbors. Cool. That is the end on the section of justice. We have one last section here where al-Rāghib talks about crafts, earning, livelihood, generosity, some things to do with that, and then we'll be at the end. It's interesting because he could have put this section earlier, but I think he decided to put it later here because he's talking about sociality and living in community and the ways in which people are mutually interdependent. So he starts this section by saying that man's need for social cooperation and mutual assistance is fundamental. You can't make your things by yourself. The clothes come from somewhere, the pen, the computer. You're already socially imbricated. Sorry, it's early. I need to drink coffee. Just by the virtue of your necessities. Many hands make for light work, says the author. Cooperation is necessary. Poverty and the fear of poverty are reasons for governing man's affairs, meaning it's actually divinely willed for a very good reason. On one hand, provision is part of Allah's wisdom and decree. And this is something that my Sheikh in Medina, Sheikh Abdullah Shinqiti, Hafidhullah, used to say, and I found it also in the al-Rāghib al-Iṣfahānī. There are people who, if they were rich, would corrupt the earth. And so Allah keeps them poor to save them from sin. There are other people who, if they were poor, would fall into despair and disbelief. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keeps them rich in order to save them from that. For most people, poverty and the fear of poverty are their main motivations to work. We don't show up to work every day just out of the goodness of our own hearts. And that has reasons for it. Al-Rāghib al-Iṣfahānī says that people should try to identify what they are good at or feel called to do and derive satisfaction from, the original meaning of the word vocation, to be called to do something, and to make their means of lawful livelihood that, and also their means of drawing towards Allah. Taking pride in your work is an Islamic quality. Allah praises the angels for a job well done in maintaining the fire and doing the various things that they do. And the best craftsmen love their craft, take pride in it, and seek Allah's pleasure through it. We'll return to craft at the very end, and it's kind of a metaphor for this whole thing of habitus and subject formation. Earning a livelihood is essential. It's actually kind of funny because the author goes on a long rant about fake Sufis. People who, he says, don't work, have no knowledge, and offer no moral example. In his time, I suppose it was common that there were mendicants, people who were, self-styled dervishes that would go around and beg for money. So we've come along far away, perhaps the other extreme, but it's interesting to see what the ulama, they're responding to this phenomena that are going on in their own societies. He says that it's abominable to take money from others for services that are not rendered, or to not compensate them for a loss that has been occasioned with something of equivalent value. There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in Sahih Muslim that it's impermissible to ask other Muslims for money except for 3 situations. They all entail dire need, like disasters happening and things of that nature. The Prophet ﷺ also said, it's better for you to go up into the mountains and chop wood and go sell it on the street than to ask other people for money. A prudent person is satisfied with a day's earnings. That's enough sufficient for a day's needs and does not worry about tomorrow. You know the hadith about the Prophet ﷺ who said that the person who relies upon Allah with a proper reliance is like the bird. They leave their nest in the morning seeking Allah's provision and return at night with their belly full. The main point is that one should trust Allah and not live in fear of poverty. الشيطان يعدكم الفقر ويأمركم بالفحشاء. Allah says in Surah Al-Baqarah that He threatens you with poverty. That's how He gets you to sin. How many people, even rich people, they tie up all their money in various things just because they're deathly afraid of poverty. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises us مغفرة منه وفضلا, forgiveness and bounty. Allah promises us bounty. Shaitan threatens us with poverty. The author has another section on praising hard work and rebuking laziness. He has some similarly very, very harsh words for lazy people. I don't think that's anybody here, so I'll skip some stuff. He says it's literally dehumanizing to not be active and engaged. He also says it's foolish. And it's kind of funny when al-Rāghib al-Iṣfahānī points out that something is foolish. He's demonstrating that it's inherently contradicting. He said because the lazy person doesn't actually feel rest because your responsibilities and duties pile up and pile up and pile up, and you're actually robbed of that rest that you were looking for. And another theme that the author has explored in different sections previous to today, but also in this one, is how much, how should we say it, not sin per se, but these types of things can result from a person seeking in the dunya what only belongs in the afterlife. Remember how we talked about joy and pleasure, and how the joy is really meant to be a sign of the everlasting pleasure of the afterlife. And the mistake is then to try to seek to stitch together like every single moment in the dunya with these little joys. That's not what they're there for, and that's actually going to put you in a very frantic and desperate and addicted state. Well, the same thing goes here with laziness. Your repose and your rest and your tranquility that you're really yearning for is in the afterlife. So if you pervert that and you think that, oh, I'm just going to just do nothing here, right, then you're kind of trying to make your dunya into your Jannah, which doesn't really work. Crafts. Okay, everybody needs a craft. They need something that they're good at. Thoreau said that man would not be satisfied to carry a rock back and forth for a wage. Right, that we need to put our hands to something to be able to do. And that might be intellectual, it might be with our physical hands, that it's part of being human. And he ranks them, as he does, because he really likes taxonomy and he likes to rank things and enumerate things. He says that some crafts are essential, meaning the world doesn't function without them. Others are crafts that support other crafts ahead of time, such as smithing or preparing yarn for clothing and things of that nature. But the noblest craft of all is ruling. He says siyasa, which is interesting. And of course, going back to the first lesson, what he means by siyasa is siyasa in the broadest sense. Siyasa of the self, of the nafs, of the soul, managing your soul, but also managing your affairs. He also includes under siyasa, which is usually translated as politics, by the way, but it's much greater than that, the work of the sages and the ulama and the people who are trying to govern the interior realities of human beings by giving them orientation, tawajjuh. And then he does include in there rulers and governors and things of that nature because, as we've talked about before, they have an extremely large amount of responsibility, and the effects of their virtue or vice is felt by all. He does make it clear, though, of course, that the people dealing with the interior world, the sage and the preacher, are the most honorable of all because they're dealing with the guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In fact, he says, knowledge of wisdom is the noblest craft of all. since it not only involves the rational faculty as opposed to the other faculties, but it guides people to paradise, and that work takes place within the human soul. And I know some of you have come up to me and asked, or your children have come up to me and asked, about wanting to seek knowledge in a more formal, traditional, and full-time way. And my advice to parents is to let them go. Let them go do it. I always chuckle at the parents to say, but what about his future? I think it's the best thing for his akhirah. The best thing for her akhirah. The best thing you could possibly do for your future. Oh, sorry, which future did you mean? I have a hypothesis, and it was crazy because al-Rāghib al-Iṣfahānī backed it up. Because one of the things that I think about, like for example, take evolution. There's the account of human history. How do we get here? One of the things that never made sense to me about the evolutionary model of human development is all of the indigenous knowledge of plants and medicine and things of this nature. I just find it impossible to believe that they just were doing trial and error and seeing who dropped dead and seeing who got cured. Where does this come from? I had a strong hunch for a while that this is actually a type of revelation that's given to people. Al-Rāghib al-Iṣfahānī 1,000 years ago says exactly that. He says, in fact, he even goes down further and he says that all crafts at their base, at their origin, start with revelation. That these are not things that humans could have figured out on their own. They come maybe through divine inspiration, maybe through dreams, but we didn't identify medicinal herbs by just using a crash dummy. Couple notes about wisdom and couple notes about money and Allah's wisdom about it. Money is essential. It's not the root of all evil, as is commonly said in the English language. Without it, people could not manage their affairs. Hoarding, however, is forbidden. It's also the mark of a very unintelligent person, since money is not truly valuable by itself. It's only a means to an end. Wealth is harmful if it's treated as the goal of the worldly life. It can be beneficial if it's viewed as a tool to fulfilling your duties and for your pathway to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and being His representative. It's more difficult to acquire wealth from lawful sources. We know that. The righteous acquire wealth with great difficulty, the author says. The unrighteous and unscrupulous acquire it very easily because they don't care where it comes from. So don't feel bad. It also shows you why you shouldn't compare yourself to other people, right? You know, people are really big about net worth these days. Your net worth, what's your net worth? My net worth is about 2 espressos, maybe 3 espressos. It's not very much. But it's the wrong way to value a human being, in multiple ways. And it's actually the same mistake of the people of Qarūn, right? The people who admired Qarūn in Surah Al-Qasas. Oh, Qarūn is so amazing. Look at how much wealth he has. He must be prosperity gospel, Muslim prosperity gospel. He must be blessed by Allah. Until, who shot you? Then it's over. We see that they regret, because there's literally, Allah takes so many opportunities in the Quran to demonstrate that there's almost no connection between what you receive of wealth and provision in this life and being approved by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala threatens the Fir'auns of the world that He will punish them by that very thing. In fact, our author, al-Rāghib al-Iṣfahānī, says that when it comes to wealth, first of all, yes, He grants it to whoever He wants. Second, Allah's will is the primary factor, not people's hard work, not people's effort. And He says with the virtues, it's the opposite. So He says with the virtues, a little bit of it is because of Allah's provision and what He has granted ahead of time. But the majority of it is what you do with it, what you accrue. The intelligent person will have an easy come, easy go mentality towards worldly things. There's 3 groups of people when it comes to this world. Al-Rāghib al-Iṣfahānī says there's group 1, they are so immersed in the worldly life that they have no concern for the next. The other is the opposite. They're fixated on the hereafter with no concern for this worldly life. The author says that neither of those is appropriate. The balance is in between the two. People who care for their welfare in both realms, that is the balanced and best way. He says explicitly, someone who cares for and tends to both realms is better than the ascetic who renounces this world entirely. He compares it to an enemy army, someone facing an enemy army. He says a timid person will steer clear entirely of the enemy army. He will seek safety, and he deserves neither blame nor credit for that. The other is a reckless person who charges into the army without a plan, without a strategy, without really knowing what's going on. They're going to be mowed down very quickly. A virtuous person has a plan and advances and eventually subdues the enemy being the dunya. That leads to the question, who can get involved in the world's affairs and who may not, or what are the dangers of doing so? The author gives the example of a snake charmer. He says, the dunya is like a poisonous snake. You watch a snake charmer, they know how to deal with a snake. Even sometimes they can extract venom from the poisonous snake. The average person is like someone watching Steve Irwin on television. Remember Steve Irwin? Crikey. And I can do that. And of course, it doesn't end up so well. That there's a process of training that one has to subject themselves to if they want to deal with the world in a way that's not going to swallow them or poison them. And that is what the entire book is about. Disciplining your desires, strengthening the intellect, developing your virtues. A couple notes on spending. Spending can be blameworthy or praiseworthy. The blameworthy type of spending is either extravagant on one extreme or stingy to the other. It can be extravagant when it is inappropriate and obscene. Muslim marriage, wedding culture? The worst type of extravagance is on the haram, even if it's a penny. If it's more than you can afford, that's a different type of extravagance, and it's not okay. That does not apply to righteous causes, the author says. Abu Bakr, as we know, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, gave away all of his wealth for a righteous cause. That's not what we're talking about. Stinginess is no better. In fact, stinginess, the author will say, is usually worse. It is either spending very little of what one has or not giving in situations where one should be generous. The author says that stinginess is more problematic and blameworthy because an extravagant person, at least someone else is making a living off of him. Literally, the author says that. And then the other thing is that it's easier to mold and correct the extravagant person because they really just need to tone it down a little bit. Whereas a stingy person has to make a complete 180. The only exception to that, when stinginess is worse than extravagance, is if stinginess, if the spending of the extravagant person harms other people. That's the one scenario in which extravagance is worse. When you do give, you should imitate the generosity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, says the author. Give to others who are deserving without drawing attention to your own generosity and without causing them harm. The author says to give to someone undeserving is wasteful. To give out of fear is just to protect yourself. And to give in order to get something back is trade. It's not generosity. Very difficult in the social media age. Very difficult in the age of non-profit industrial complex charity organizations. I'll leave that there. Last point here, and then we'll get to some questions perhaps on actions, and this will bring everything full circle because we like that as human beings. The difference between action, work, and craftsmanship. The most important point al-Rāghib makes here is that the difference between action and craft is that an action that is performed without thinking about it is blameworthy. It's usually reckless, considered reckless. A craft that is performed without thinking about it actually demonstrates mastery. Right? Someone who's done it so many times, it's automatic. And this is a metaphor that he uses for the entire project of purifying the soul, the entire project of cultivating virtue. That in the beginning, anything you do to cultivate virtue is going to be very, very difficult. It's going to be like riding a bike for the first time. It's going to be like swimming for the first time. You're going to be awkward. It's going to be hard. It's going to feel weird. The goal is that with practice, with diligence, and with support from those around you and also your mentors, it will become easier and easier and easier until it is second nature. And then you're really, as we say, cooking with grease. You're really making your way towards the afterlife with the facilitation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is all for al-Rāghib al-Iṣfahānī. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from you and from me and from the author and forgive me for my shortcomings, and hopefully there was benefit to be had. Barakallahu feekum. Let's get to some questions. We'll see however many we can get through. I'll make the same offer today. We'll leave this open all day long, and if you want to send them in, yesterday I got around to them probably maybe around like 4 or 5 p.m. I'll try to answer all of them at least in writing. We might have less time for the questions today because of the special guest that we have coming later. Salam. Walaikum salam. Could you talk more about hollowness and share any practical tips on how to treat it? I did respond to this in writing the other day. We live, oh boy, I mean, this is a huge topic. Honestly, sometimes it will require therapy, right? That there are many people who did not have emotionally available parents. It wounded a lot of people in childhood. We're an entire generation that has attachment issues. It's not good. No, seriously, I was not even joking. And some of these things cannot be solved without therapy and exploring these types of things. I know that's not something that we're really good at or supportive of in the Muslim community. It doesn't mean, as I was talking to one young person yesterday, it doesn't mean like going all in on the acceptance culture. It doesn't mean accepting the whole worldview of whatever, but it is important to address these types of things. Allah knows best. But the point in the relationship to the book and its subject matter is that it creates a hollowness that then one seeks to fill through these types of ways. It could be validation from other people. It could be those joys. It could be the pleasures. It could be social media. It could be pornography. It could be gambling. It could be addictions of various sorts. A lot of times that comes from an emptiness inside. And so the emptiness has to be addressed. How can one accept and love oneself despite knowing his shortcomings so well? Well, I mean, you're not different than anybody else. We all have them, and yet we all need to have some grace with ourselves. People are usually two types. They're usually either too hard or too easy on themselves. I think in these days, we're often too hard on ourselves. I think that we need to have grace with our own selves to understand that we're not perfect. We're on a journey. We've gone through a lot. And we're trying our best. Not to excuse poor behavior or sin, especially if it harms other people, but just as like a baseline. That makes sense. What's one of the most prominent life lessons that would benefit young seekers of knowledge? Similar to what I had mentioned earlier, a teacher who wants to truly benefit you will put you on a pathway to surpass him or her. There's a lot of gatekeepers out there. Assalamu alaikum wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Are you following the Hanbali madhab? If so, do you recommend any course in English to learn fiqh according to the school? Yes, by default, I follow the Hanbali madhab, though of course I'm not perfect in that. John Starling, Imam John Starling and Sheikh Joe Bradford are excellent sources. Imam John Starling in particular has courses. I think he started teaching with Safina Society with Dr. Shadi al-Masri, if I'm not mistaken. But he has also translated several of the Hanbali fiqh manuals into English, and he also has, I believe, a website called Hanbali Disciples, which is almost like asynchronous courses in the Hanbali school. As a son, how do we encourage our parents to continue to enjoy life while still living for the deen, without making their life being about waiting for death? I just laugh because I don't know anyone like that. Like, I've never seen like a young Muslim person, and I deal with youth a lot, like just like sitting in a corner rocking, like waiting for death. So like part of the difficulty of religious teachers, leaders, etc., is bringing people back to the middle when like most people have gone to one extreme. There will always be a couple people on the other extreme, and they'll often actually feel neglected because we're so busy dealing with like the extreme that most people have gone to. But I have yet to see a young person in that situation. So maybe it's not an issue. I think that I don't see young people needing encouragement to enjoy life. I think they're enjoying life quite a lot. Oh, pushback. What's that? Parents need to what? Enjoy life more? Oh, maybe I misread it. I'm sorry. Let me take another sip here. Any more questions? No, I'm just kidding. Parents need to enjoy life more? What are they doing? The parents are waiting for death? People in this room? The end of their life. I'm confused. I'm sorry. Let me go back. Let me see. I can actually get back to this here. Answered tab. Talk about a premature mess up. Oh, as a son, how do we encourage our parents to continue to enjoy life while still living for the deen without making... Okay, so the situation is an elderly parent who is rocking in the corner waiting for death. I think one of the benefits of al-Rāghib al-Iṣfahānī is to show the way in which they're mutually complementary, the dunya and the afterlife. And that the things that are placed in the dunya, if properly used, are actually to secure your happiness in the afterlife. They're not the obstacle that you need to run away from and hide from, okay? Just like the example he just gave of the soldier, right? The soldier who runs away from the enemy army, yeah, maybe he avoids the harm, but he also has not gained any merit or distinction either. That enjoying the things of this life in a halal way is part of gratitude towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for enabling us to have these pleasures, right, in the first place. If it's done just like with marital intercourse, when the Prophet ﷺ said that you'll be rewarded for it, right? And the companions were shocked. They were like, what? Like, we're going to experience desires and get reward in the afterlife for it? And he said, well, if you had satisfied that urge in an impermissible way, wouldn't you be punished for it? And they said, yeah, of course. He said, so, hence, if you satisfy it in a permissible way, then you'll be rewarded for it. If you enjoy the dunya in an appropriate way, then not only will you be rewarded for it, but it reminds you of the afterlife. There's no bifurcation between the two. What was the aspect that made you turn to the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How did you know you were on the right path? I don't know that I'm on the right path, but one thing that Allah gifted me, one of those things that Allah created me, I can't take credit for having acquired it, is that I really just want to know what the truth is. And I've been willing to make large sacrifices in my life for following what I think is the right thing and the truth. So I think that's the meta skill there. And I guess you could say that that answers the first question as well. How should we regard, I was waiting for one of these. How should we regard scholars silent on Muslim governments' harm to Muslims and collaboration with Zionists? It's a big issue. I think that, to be frank, we live in a time in which political discourse among Muslim scholars is weak. I think that this is a result of the colonization of the Muslim world and the control of our knowledge production and seminaries by state actors. If you look at the history of our ummah, every single one of the 4 fiqh madhahibs, their founders spent time in jail. Abu Hanifa supported the rebellion of Ahlul Bayt. A lot of people don't talk about that. I'm just saying that there's a certain political philosophy at play that we don't necessarily recognize as a distinct political philosophy with its own distinct theory of change, that to have a certain type of access to rulers or power or whatever is going to affect change. And my understanding, humble understanding of the faqir, and I could be completely wrong about this, is that that's not how Muslim scholars have seen things throughout the longue durée of Islamic scholarship. I think that Zionism is the most significant threat to Muslims existentially throughout the world because it cuts across so many other issues. They have henchmen within the Muslim community, the Emirates being the top, but also the others. Don't think Morocco's safe. I know we like to go to Morocco. The government of Morocco also, the government of Egypt. I mean, to be frank, most of the governments. It's a sad time. It's problematic. We should strike the balance between praying for the guidance of our rulers, but also being uncompromising and speaking the truth. Speak the truth. Never stop speaking the truth. It doesn't have to teeter into things like takfir or extremism to speak the truth. And I think it would be a great service if some of the students of knowledge or the scholars would put together books of how the Salaf treated, let's say, called people out. right? To use a colloquialism, that it is true that there are situations where the best advice is done in private, but there are other situations where it's not. And if we look comprehensively at the actions of the Salaf, we see a wide variety of practices, including, at times, occasionally, open rebellion and the support of rebellion. That's a fact. So my concern, this is the difference between tradition and neo-tradition. Okay, so neo-tradition is a selective curation of part of the tradition and the presenting of it to the modern audience as this is the tradition. My humble experience is that often the tradition, capital T, is much more complicated and varied than what many people let on. Allah knows best. Maybe I won't see you again next year or get invited back. But no, Sheikh Yahya knows. We have a great relationship, and I'm amazed sometimes that he allows me a platform to speak because my opinions are well known. But it's part of that thing Allah created in me. I just try to follow the truth, and I get very upset at injustice, especially when Muslims are complicit in it. Allah knows best. I think I'll take just a couple more minutes, a couple more questions. I'll answer the rest through writing because I don't want to go into the time. I take care of my disabled father, but I hold him accountable for a lot of harm in my life. Will I be rewarded for caring for him while being displeased with him? Absolutely, absolutely, and that's actually a wonderful thing to model. It's no secret our parents have done harm to us, are responsible for a lot of the stuff that we have to overcome. That's just speaking factually. It's not to condemn them to hellfire or anything like that. Part of grace and part of maturity is finding a way to do the right thing and be right and do right by them. Despite that, protecting yourself while also striving in their service and in their aid. Because once they're gone, that's it. You're not going to have any more opportunities. So may Allah reward you. Last one. Jazakum khair. Your sessions were quite comprehensive. What would be 3 absolute takeaways from the sessions? Perhaps one from each day. Habibi, go ask AI to make a summary. These things are not, this isn't TikTok. It's like, it's presented as a 5-day course to be presented as a 5-day course. I'm not gonna, you could have, I just skipped the session and show up on the last day and ask for 3 takeaways. I was born at night, but I wasn't born last night. No, I'm just kidding. The person had a good intention with asking the question, but we don't do that here. Barakallahu feekum, subhanakallah wa bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.